Well, first of all, thank you, Senator Marshall, for sponsoring this press conference. Thanks to all of you for coming here. And I want to thank the legal minds of our conference for kind of laying out the case of why we must hold a trial. I'm going to make the practical case. The reason Chuck Schumer wants to table it is this chart. I was with President Trump last week, traveling with him. Of course, we talked about the border. And I showed him this chart that I've been developing since I was chairman of Homeland Security, probably in 2014 and beyond, just updating it monthly. The disaster that was deferred action on childhood arrivals, which sparked this massive, under a Biden, invasion of our country. President Trump liked the chart, and he adapted it. He modified it for his own use. It's gotten more publicity as a result. I'm shocked. But one of the commentators, one political commentators, retweeted that chart and said, this will itself decide the election. That's why Senator Schumer does not want to hold this trial. I've made one additional modification. By the way, what I like about this chart and what I've tried to describe here is the cause and effect. Starting with DACA, the reinterpretation of the Flores decision, the fact that President Trump was faced with his own border crisis, but he fixed it. You'll notice his peak, a little under 5,000 people a day on average being encountered at the southern border. Within 12 months, he had reduced that down to about 500 a day. Now, that was before Title 42. What I've added to the chart now is expulsions under Title 42. So even though single adults started increasing in about May of 2020, during the election year, because Democrat presidential candidates were vowing they would end deportation, they'd provide free health care. That was an incentive. That's the problem. The Biden administration, Democrats, they are incentivizing the invasion of this country. So more people started coming. But because of COVID, President Trump invoked Title 42. And he started expelling people. So you can see the incredibly small numbers of people under the Trump administration that President Trump allowed in this country. We had pretty well secured our border, setting up the next step of passing a functioning legal immigration system. I was working with Senator Lee and the Trump administration on that. We would have fixed these problems. But unfortunately, America made the wrong choice. They elected President Biden, and Democrats control the houses of Congress. And this is an important point to understand. Democrats, President Biden, want an open border. They caused this problem. We didn't need a law passed to have President Biden have the authority to close the border. President Trump, using existing law, closed the border. President Biden, using that exact same authority, opened it up. So you can see the explosion from the end of the end of the Trump administration, where virtually we had the border closed, and then the explosion and the widening gap as President Biden allowed Title 42 to expire. But even without that, even using Title 42, they welcomed, they incentivized families, unaccompanied children, and subjected them to the depredations. Their open border policy facilitates the multi-billion-dollar business model of some of the most evil people on the planet. The human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers, poisoning our cities. That's what Biden and the Democrats, and this is important to note too, it's not just President Biden. This is Democrat policies. That's what must be defeated. But Senator Schumer wants to nip this impeachment trial in the bud because he doesn't want the House managers to make the case, to explore exactly what happened, how their actions, how their policies are causing this invasion. They don't want to be held accountable. That's why a trial is imperative in the United States Senate, and why I so appreciate what Speaker Johnson apparently just announced, that he's going to delay delivery of these things so that Senator Schumer doesn't have Thursday at 1 o'clock to just snuff this thing out. So again, thank you, Senator Marshall. Thank you all. And Senator Schmidt.
Thank you.